Merging with Mother Earth. This is heart alignment. Unfortunately, we live in a left brain society. So you can say we have really lost our way. Literally. Because we have lost the right hemisphere perception. The perception of each is very different from the other.
Evolution has done it this way, and evolution ultimately knows why it did it this way, etc. And what is the meaning of that? What I would suggest to you is the differences between the two brains are remarkable. If you really want to get a quick read on that, either my own work or read Ian McGilchrist, you know, the British neuropsychiatrist Ian McGilchrist, McGilchrist, where he talks about, in 3 chapters, study on study about the differences between the 2 hemispheres, etc. They are not duplicates of each other. They have different growth spurts even. The right goes into a growth spurt first, and then it goes to a left, and then right and left along the lifespan, etc. The left hemisphere goes to sleep before the right. The right clearly is dominant for emotions and for social emotional intelligence and for socialization factors. The left is more analytical, logical, abstract. The right is more intuitive, etc. So essentially what it has done, it's given us these 2 brains so that we can be a whole person. The other thing is that one brain cannot do what the other can do. So it's not as if one can, you know, compensate for the other also.
It's my balance, and I'm propped up against the wall. And I look down at my arm, and I realize that I can no longer define the boundaries of my body. I can't define where I begin and where I end, because the atoms and the molecules of my arm blended with the atoms and molecules of the wall. And all I could detect was this energy. And I'm asking myself, what is wrong with me? What is going on? And in that moment, my brain chatter, my left hemisphere brain chatter, went totally silent. Just like someone took a remote control and pushed the mute button. Total silence. And at first I was shocked to find myself inside of a silent mind. But then I was immediately captivated by the magnificence of the energy around me. And because I could no longer identify the boundaries of my body, I felt enormous and expansive. I felt at one with all the energy that was, and it was beautiful there. And then all of a sudden, my left hemisphere comes back online, and it says to me, hey, we got a problem, we got to get some help. And I'm going, oh, I got a problem. So it's like, okay, I got a problem. But then I immediately drifted right back out into the consciousness, and I affectionately refer to this space as La La Land. But it was beautiful there. Imagine what it would be like to be totally disconnected from your brain chatter that connects you to the external world. So here I am in this space, and my job and any stress related to my job, it was gone. And I felt lighter in my body. And imagine all of the relationships in the external world and any stressors related to any of those, they were gone. And I felt this sense of peacefulness. And imagine what it would feel like to lose 37 years of emotional baggage. Oh, I felt euphoria. My mind was now suspended between 2 very opposite planes of reality. Stimulation coming in through my sensory systems felt like pure pain. Light burned my brain like wildfire, and sounds were so loud and chaotic that I could not pick a voice out from the background noise, and I just wanted to escape.
So for me, who knows about the autistic side, this sounds very familiar. Sensory overload. When sensory perception is at an all-time high, which can even lead to synesthesia, and that can be overwhelming. That's only logical, but we call that a disorder. When it might be just an extreme right hemisphere perception. The left hemisphere not online at the moment. And we can shift in and out of it.
Because I could not identify the position of my body in space, I felt enormous and expansive, like a genie just liberated from her bottle. And my spirit soared free like a great whale gliding through a sea of silent euphoria. I found nirvana. And I remember thinking there's no way I would ever be able to squeeze the enormousness of myself back inside this tiny little body. But then I realized, but I'm still alive. I'm still alive, and I have found nirvana. And if I have found nirvana and I'm still alive, then everyone who is alive can find nirvana. And I pictured a world filled with beautiful, peaceful, compassionate, loving people who knew that they could come to this space at any time and that they could purposely choose to step to the right of their left hemispheres and find this peace. And then I realized what a tremendous gift this experience could be. What a stroke of insight this could be to how we live our lives.
Strong emotion in all animals is on the right side of the brain, etc. And all individuals, when we're under stress, we're moving from the left to the right. The basic stress regulating mechanism in the brain is in the right hemisphere, not the left hemisphere.
Therefore, if we are moving out of the window of tolerance, where we are grounded, flexible, open, curious, present, we go into the hyper arousal, the fight-flight, because it's overwhelming. There is high energy present. If that doesn't help, we go into hypo-arousal. We shut down. We feel numb. We are withdrawn. That's the classic freeze response. The possum playing dead in order to avoid the threat.
The right has more connections to the HPA axis, including the sympathetic nervous system.
Ian McGilchrist argues that the right hemisphere is actually the master, and the left hemisphere its emissary, and not the other way around.
The left hemisphere, dependent on denotative language and abstraction, yields clarity and power to manipulate things that are known, fixed, static, isolated, decontextualized, explicit, general in nature, but ultimately lifeless.
The interpretive world, the world of applied meaning to incoming experiences that progressively builds mental structures and frameworks that ultimately filter our direct sensed experiences of the physical world and develops conscious mind as the primary guide. The ego world, ego contortion that further clads, alters and filters the logical meaning we get from experiences of the physical world and further buries our original capacity for sensing and beingness. This can be indoctrination, culture, economics, identifications, rewards, honed addictions, and competition for social, economic, cultural currency. By Donna Williams, The System of Sensing.
The knowledge that's mediated by the left hemisphere is, however, within a closed system. It has the advantage of perfection, but the perfection is bought ultimately at the price of emptiness. There's a problem here about the nature of the two worlds. They offer us two versions of the world, and obviously we combine them in different ways all the time. We need to rely on certain things to manipulate the world, but for a broad understanding of it, we need to use knowledge that comes from the right hemisphere. And it's my suggestion to you that in the history of Western culture, things started in the 6th century BC, in the Augustan era, and in the 15th, 16th century in Europe, with a wonderful balancing of these hemispheres. But in each case, it drifted further to the left hemisphere's point of view. Nowadays, we live in a world which is paradoxical. We pursue happiness, and it leads to resentment, and it leads to unhappiness, and it leads, in fact, to an explosion of mental illness. We've pursued freedom, but we now live in a world which is more monitored by CCTV cameras, and in which our daily lives are more subjected to what de Tocqueville called a network of small, complicated rules that cover the surface of life and strangle freedom. More information, we have it in spades, but we get less and less able to use it, to understand it, to be wise. There's a paradoxical relationship, as I know as a psychiatrist, between adversity and fulfillment, between restraint and freedom, between the knowledge of the parts and wisdom about the whole. A machine model again that is supposed to answer everything, but it doesn't. Think about this. Even rationality is grounded in a leap of intuition. There is no way you can rationally prove that rationality is a good way to look at the world. We intuit that it is very helpful. And this is not new. At the other end of the process, rationality we know from Gödel's theorem, we know from what Pascal was saying hundreds of years before Gödel, that the end point of rationality is to demonstrate the limits to rationality. In our modern world, we've developed something that looks awfully like the left hemisphere's world. We prioritize the virtual over the real. The technical becomes important. Bureaucracy flourishes. The picture, however, is fragmented. There's a loss of uniqueness. The how has become subsumed in what. And the need for control leads to a paranoia in society that we need to govern and control everything. Why this shift? The left hemisphere's talk is very convincing because it shaved everything that it doesn't find fits with its model off and cut it out. So this particular model is entirely self-consistent, largely because it's made itself. More importantly, there's a sort of hall of mirrors effect. The more we get trapped into this, the more we undercut and ironize things that might have led us out of it. And we just get reflected back into more of what we know about what we know about what we know.
At all points in time, one of these is in the foreground, one of these is in the background. And when we're, right now, as I'm speaking to you, Broca to Poranqui, we're both left in the foreground because you're following my phonemes, the semantics, you're following my semantics. But as we shift now and it gets into something emotional, the right will come into the foreground of consciousness. The other thing that's important to understand is that the major effect that one hemisphere has on the other is to inhibit it. The left inhibits the right inhibits the left. So the question about resilience is how can we literally use the right in an emotional context, use the left in a more, in a more intellectual, auditory, language context, et cetera, et cetera. So it's two brains. And nature has made it, I think, with a value judgment that the first one to come online is the right. I mean, that's essentially what regulates our bodily functions, regulates our emotional states, regulates our distance with other human beings, et cetera, et cetera. So that one, the right, I'm suggesting the right hemisphere is dominant. Last piece of this, it used to be thought that language was the highest function that human beings had, and therefore the left hemisphere was dominant. But we now know that humor, empathy, compassion, intuition, creativity are all right brain functions. And again, to be a full human being, etc. So it turns out, to get back to the earlier question about what happens if things don't go well early in life, you have certain forms of personality. Let's say an insecure, dismissive personality who's essentially attempting to live in the left, who's attempting to figure out how to be in the world with other human beings socially, logically, and analytically. That's not going to be there, etc. So it's the access to both of these hemispheres that I think is critical. But in the end, to give meaning, actually meaning is generated in the right also. That's why more and more now we're now looking at these right hemisphere studies that are highlighting the relationship, so to speak, between the patient and the therapist. But that relationship is not a relationship between two conscious minds, two left hemispheres. Again, that relationship is an intersubjective relationship. It's much deeper than that. It's the same mechanisms that human beings use in intimate contexts. That system, which again would heighten the idea that the intersubjective, the relational, is central to the treatment. The ability to empathically resonate with someone else's subjectivity is very different than giving another person advice or telling them what to do or how they should be, et cetera, which on the surface looked as it was an attempt of some positive, really was not. I mean, in some ways, it could have been more shaming and humiliating and really not a matter of the deep contact that we're talking about here.
How would you describe the current state of the world?
Well, at the moment, the world is in quite a disconnected state, certainly as humans anyway. And to the extent that we've become so disconnected from nature, nature is struggling at the hands of what humans are doing. What we're doing and what we're not doing, how we're not being related anymore. So I think really that the humans are suffering from a great separation sickness. Lifetime's journey to find out who we really are. And animals and non-animals, plants as well, they're just so authentically being who they are. They don't have the same barriers that we humans have to showing that. They don't feel shy or self-conscious about it. They just are self, and they're radiating that like it or leave it.
The right hemisphere, by contrast, yields a world of individual, changing, evolving, interconnected, implicit, incarnate, living beings within the context of the lived world, but in the nature of things never fully graspable, never perfectly known.
Change the way you think about hidden potential and how to help them release it. The realm of sensing is the place we have all come from. That world before mind was thought of as me before body became mine, that time when we knew because we felt the nature of things, the feel of them when we sensed. This was before we had learned to interpret and see the world not as it was, but through our concepts and ideas of what it was. My world, one's own world. This is our first world, before all of its later cladding and contortions. It is at first a place of sensing, beingness, the preconscious mind and unknown knowing. It is the place where we understand self in others and others in self through the skill of mergence. The external world, the physical world known through our sensory experiences, as processed through our body's brains, and experienced as sensations, thoughts, emotions, connections. This is a directly hands-on world, where sensing and beingness may be relatively strongly intact.
So for humanity to change things, for humanity to survive the current times, we really need to reconnect with non-humans, not as a concept, not sitting behind computer screens, not in virtual ways, but ironically to really get back in a five-sensory felt relationship with nature. And once we're back in direct relationship on the five-sensory level, what arises is the so-called sixth sense. What arises is a repatterning of how our minds are working. What arises is an expanded state of being.
A place of sensing, beingness. The preconscious mind and unknown knowing. It is the place where we understand self in others and others in self through the skill of mergence.
And I really think that deep nature connection is the only way for us to again know and therefore understand and therefore care about the other beings that all of our actions affect on a daily basis.
Mergence with nature.
I encourage every single person to get out there, take up your shoes, get out there, whether it's in your yard with a cup of tea, feet on the ground, 20 minutes a day, just get out there.
So peaceful. That is so recharging. Just enjoying nature, being, listening, breathing.
And if we look back 12,000 years ago or further, we find that the ways that our species and our ancestors, our human ancestors, were related to their natural environments were very different. Humans didn't have this superiority complex. They didn't deem to know better or to be above the other species, and truly regarded all other aspects of nature as fellow beings of equal value. I don't think we're inherently conflicted, but I do trust that in some way our journey of separation and going fully into duality is one way in which we are being set up to learn, to integrate, to come back into unity consciousness. So it's part of some mysterious opportunity for us to heal the polarity within ourselves and time ago risen up and trampled us all to death and just expressed their dismay and their despair. They don't do that. They have such compassion for the extent to which we've lost our ways, and they just stand in ongoing presence and witnessing what we're doing, and a certain kind of patience as a spiritual.
Refer to it. Do you think there is something directing our actions?
I certainly do believe in a greater creative force or a God or something that does animate everything. And I'm not really a predeterminist. I don't believe that the script is laid out and this is how things are just going to happen. But I believe that there is some fantastic orchestra conductor, and to the extent that the different parts of the orchestra can get along and play in harmony, well, the result will be a beautiful symphony, or a rather... Honing this kind of communication skill is something that's absolutely accessible to every single person on the planet. I wasn't born skills or dropped on my head as a baby or anything bizarre. This is something that is inherently part of the blueprint of the design of our brains, and it is how our ancestors used to relate to the world and how some indigenous people still do. To hone these skills or to fine-tune them simply requires becoming quiet enough on the matter, akin to a certain kind of meditation. However, it's not a certain technique. There's no complicated technique or, spiritual advancement level needed or anything at all. It is about accessing a quiet enough inner state to be able to hear and listen very deeply beyond the five senses. And in ordinary everyday life, we do have intuitive moments, but they tend to arise spontaneously in times of extreme intensity or when our life is in danger. Using telepathic communication is about paying attention to intuition when we want to, very intentionally, rather than waiting for it spontaneously. So I use intention to clear myself and to create a connection with the one I want to communicate with. And then I simply have to be quiet and be still and listen.
You can find Anna's channel on YouTube on Animal Spirit.